For the third part in Activity 5.8, we're going to be creating the Automoblox figure, which you see on the screen. It's going to be a multi-step process. We use quite a few different features in Inventor, and I'm going to show you a couple shortcuts along the way to make things a little bit easier for this part and then also parts in the future. So the first thing we need to do is make this base, which is a 0.575 square, and then extrude that to a depth of 0.3 inches. So I'm going to go back over to Inventor and go to a new part, standard IPT. And the first thing I want to make sure I do is create a sketch on the correct plane. So when I go to start 2D sketch, normally we'll start one on the XY plane, but since I'm starting with the base of my part and going to be making this thing vertically, I want to start on the XZ plane. So I'm going to start on the XZ plane, grab a rectangle tool, and make this 0.575, tab over 0.575, hit enter. Then I'm going to finish that sketch and extrude this to a depth of 0.3. Now if I jump back over to my activity sheet and go ahead and scroll down, and the next thing I need to do is create this ellipse on the top of that shape I just created using these dimensions. So I'm going to go back to Inventor and create a new sketch on the top of that extrusion. And you'll notice there's no ellipse tool up here, but if you hit the drop down on the circle tool, you can go down to ellipse. And it's extremely important that this is placed in the center, and we don't really have a good way of snapping to the center. So I'm going to escape out of that command. And there's a bunch of different ways to find the center point of this face. One quick one is to use the line tool and create an X from corner to corner, and X from corner to corner, and that gives us the center point of that square. This will also work for any rectangle that you might need to make. But we want to make sure that these are construction lines and not object lines. So I'm going to click and drag from the bottom right to the top left, and you'll notice I get a green selection box. Using this selection method, anything that this selection box touches will be selected. So that selects both of those. If I do it the opposite way, drag from top left to bottom right, it's a red box, and this only selects the objects that are totally within that selection box. You'll notice if I let go here, it doesn't select anything. So I could use that red box for this whole thing, but I also get these outside lines as well. So I'm going to use the other selection box, which is pulling from bottom right to top left, and gives me a green selection box. I want to select those two lines, and I'm going to turn those into construction lines, and then click off and make sure that that construction line is not selected, and it's not. Now I'm going to grab my ellipse tool, use that center point, and I want to make sure I make a totally horizontal axis here, and you'll notice that constraint pops up when it's horizontal. And just approximate where this goes and go ahead and left click to place it. Now I'm going to go ahead and grab my dimension command and jump back to my activity sheet and see that this distance is 0.236, the horizontal, and the vertical is 0.155. So go back to Inventor. All I'm going to do, I'm not going to click from the center point to the outside. All I'm going to do is click on the ellipse itself and then drag out. I can drag right or drag up. And I know this one should be 0.236. And just to double check here, the other one is 0.155. So then I'll grab the ellipse again, and that's going to be 0.155. And then I'm going to go ahead and finish that sketch. Now if I go back to the activity sheet, scroll down, actually it's up here under step 3. The last part of step 3 says we need to extrude that ellipse to a value of 0.115. So I'll go back, extrude that to a value of 0.115 and hit enter. Now if we go back to the activity sheet and scroll down, you'll see that we need to create this sketch, which is a sketch on top of the extrusion we just made. We need that same ellipse that we made last time, but on the new surface. And then we also need this offset ellipse, which is a distance of 0.05 from the original. And then we're going to create an extrusion using that. So what a lot of people would do is go in, create a 2D sketch on this, and then use the Ellipse tool to make this outline to match it, and then use the Ellipse tool again to make the larger one and then dimension between the two. There's a much quicker method to doing that. So first of all, for placing this outline, you notice we don't have the actual sketch here. If we use the project geometry feature, which is up here in about the center under the create panel, and you'll notice if I hover over that inside shape, it highlights the outside in white. If I just left click, that'll create that sketch on that edge without having to draw anything, just one click with project geometry. So that's one shortcut for doing that. And you can also project up any other features. So if I wanted to bring the outline of this square, I can use project geometry and click on that, and that'll bring up that outline of that square to the sketch that I'm using. I don't want that, so I'm going to click undo real quick. And now I need to offset this existing ellipse 0.05 away from itself. So instead of drawing another ellipse and dimensioning it, we can just use this offset command under the modify panel. And I'm going to go ahead and click on my original, and then you'll notice you can drag out and offset this thing almost any distance you want. Now we only need it 0.05, so I'm just going to put it approximately where it goes, and then I'm going to type in 0.05 and hit enter. And that offsets that ellipse 0.05 away from that original one, and then I can hit finish sketch, and you can see that I have both those sketches. Now what we need to do is create an extrusion using those sketches, and that actually happens to be what's called a tapered extrusion, and I'll show you how to do that in a minute. But if we zoom in here a little bit, we can see that we're extruding this feature to a distance of 0.84. So I'll go back to Inventor, grab the extrude panel. I'm going to select the inside profile first, then this outside profile because I need to extrude both of them, and that needs to be to a distance of 0.84. Now what you notice is that's just a normal extrusion and it's perfectly straight, but if we look at our activity sheet, this actually has a taper to it or an angle to it. So what we need to do is in our extrude panel, go to the More tab, and we need to give that in this case, a 5-degree taper. So we'll just type 5 in where under taper, and you'll notice it shows a taper. Go back to the Shape tab, make sure everything looks good, and go ahead and hit OK. And that will make our tapered extrusion for the body of our Automoblox vehicle or Automoblox person. So we'll jump back to our activity sheet, and I'm going to zoom out just a bit and scroll down. And the next thing we need to do is create a work axis in the center of our part. And then we're going to need to create a work plane that is in the center of our part as well. And that's going to allow us to do a couple things here in a minute. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to Inventor. And the first thing I'm going to do is going to be to place a work axis in this part. So I'm going to need to use this original ellipse, the shorter one that we extruded, to place my work axis. So I'm going to go up to Work Features and Axis, and then I want to hover over that initial ellipse that I extruded, and you'll notice that yellow work axis appears. So I'm going to go ahead and left click on that, and that places that yellow work axis in the center of my part. Next thing I need to do is add a work plane in the middle of my part, and I want it in the middle along this long edge of the ellipse. So I'm going to grab the drop down for plane, and I want to go to midplane between two planes. Now this is if you have two parallel planes and you want a work plane in between the two, this is the feature you're going to use every time. So I want it going this way in the middle, so I'm going to grab this front plane, and then I want it midway in between that plane and this back plane. I'll just hover over it, and you'll see that it'll put a work plane in the middle of that part intersecting that axis we just created. So I'll go ahead and left click and place that work feature, and now we have work features to use in order to create our next sketches. So I'm going to go back to the activity sheet, scroll down, and the next thing I need to do is create this cone-shaped sketch in order to extrude and give shoulders to our Automoblox person. So the only defined dimensions on this are the width, and this 0.8 should actually be 0.6 instead of 0.8. But we're going to make a line, horizontal line across approximately this distance from the top. It doesn't have to be perfect. And it's going to be 1.2 long And then so from the center it will be 0.8, and we're actually going to project this work axis we created up as well. So if we go back to Inventor, I want to create a new 2D sketch on that work plane in the center that I just created. The first thing I'm going to do is use what is called slice graphics. Now what slice graphics allows us to do is, since we have a work plane in the middle of this part, when I go into a 2D mode to do this sketch, I actually have the front half of this material in the way that I can't see all this material up here. So what I can do is use slice graphics, and I have two ways of doing that. I can right click and go into my drop down and click slice graphics, or you'll notice that you can use F7. And what that does is it cuts everything temporarily away so I can see what I'm actually sketching, which is extremely helpful. So I'll go back to 2D mode, and this work axis is a 3D feature, but I want to project that up, so I'm going to use project geometry, and I'm going to click on that work axis to give me that central axis on my sketch. Then I'm going to grab a line tool, and just to go back for reference, we want to go down about that far. So I'm just going to estimate this here, and you can do the same somewhere around here. And I want to create a horizontal line this way that is 0.6 long. Right click OK, and do the same thing the opposite way. That's perfectly horizontal and 0.6 long. Now if I go back to my sketch, I want to take the outside of those lines I just created and draw lines to this bottom corner of the base on both sides, and then I also want to complete this line on the bottom as well. So I'll go back to Inventor, grab the line tool, snap to that endpoint, then snap to this origin here. Create a line across the bottom as well, snap to the other side, and then bring that line up and complete that cone shape up there. Now the next thing I need to do is create that top arc. So I'm going to go back to Inventor, grab my arc tool, and I want a 3-point arc. I'm going to click on the endpoint of the left line, endpoint of the right line, and then I'm going to drag this thing up until I get to the top of my shape, and I can zoom in here a little bit. I'm just basically snapping to the top of my shape. And actually, let's do this first. I want to use project geometry, and I want to project just this line right here, the very top line. I'm going to project that up, and that's going to make it a little easier to place my arc. So once again, 3-point arc, left side, right side of that line, and then that'll allow me to snap it a little easier to the top there. So I have that overall shape. Now I can finish sketch. And if we go back to the activity sheet, it tells us to do a midplane intersect extrusion. So what that means, if I go back over here, I'm going to grab my extrude command. I want to select both profiles I just created. I want to do a midplane extrusion or a symmetric extrusion. And I want to do, we normally use either the join or the cut extrusion, but I want to use this intersect extrusion. And what that's going to do is when I hit OK, it's going to cut away everything that was outside the bounding box of that sketch that we just created. And this can be super useful for things in the future. Well, let me go back and edit that extrusion. So you'll notice everything that's outside that box we created, which are those edges that were outside of that, it's going to delete or cut away. So hit OK, and that gives us the shoulders of our Automoblox person. I'm going to jump back to my activity sheet. And the last thing I need to do is create my Automoblox person. So I'm going to create another sketch on that work plane in the center that I made. And I'm going to create basically half of the Automoblox person's head to revolve around. There are no dimensions for this, so you just need to make it look approximately like this sketch here on the activity sheet. So I'm going to jump back to Inventor. I'm going to create a new sketch on that work plane and drag down here a little bit. And I'm going to use the line command, and I'm going to escape, and I want to use slice graphics again, so I'm going to right click and slice graphics. And then once again, I'm going to project just these top two lines here. Actually, that's not the one I wanted. I just want that one there. That'll be fine. And I'm going to use the line command, snap to the endpoint there, and I'm going to make this, say, 0.3 tall. Right click OK. And then I just need to make a profile to rotate. And you can give them a spherical head. I mean, it doesn't really matter to me. I'm just going to go ahead and use the arc command, 3-point arc, and I'm just going to kind of eyeball this here a little bit of an arc. So if I go back here, I'm creating that top arc there. Then I'm going to create a vertical line down and then close it out with an arc. So use my line tool, snap to that endpoint. Somewhere around there looks good. And then grab my arc tool, snap to the bottom there, and then just give it that rough shape. And it's not even close to the same, and that's totally fine. It doesn't matter. But now I'm going to finish that sketch. Go to an ISO view here. And I still have that original work axis going through the center there, which is what I need to rotate this. So I'm going to grab my revolve command. It auto-selects my profile. Then I'm going to select the axis. And if you can't find it in here, you can always click on it in the browser as well. And you'll see that it'll rotate that around. And you want to make sure that that is join command, and then hit OK. Now what you may notice is that that barely intersects there. So that's a common mistake to make. So I'm going to go back to and expand my revolution, so hit the plus sign, go back to my original sketch, and I'm going to right click and slice graphics. And this time, instead of going to that point, I'm going to delete this arc. And I'm going to extend my original line down just a little bit, and then I'm going to make that arc go into the Automoblox figure a little bit farther. Something like that will work. And that way when this rotates around, I'll join anything that's overlapping here. So I'll finish that sketch. That'll update it. And then you can see that I'm overlapping a little bit better. So if I were to print this or manufacture this, it would actually be a little bit stronger and that head wouldn't just fall off. Once you have this done, you can go ahead and add a color to it. Doesn't really matter what color. I'll make her orange-red. And make sure that you hide your work features. So right-click on work plane, uncheck visibility, right-click on work axis, uncheck visibility, and make sure you save this to your 5.8 folder and naming it Automoblox figure _ first initial last name.